I can feel it coming in the Jane Eyre tonight. Oh, Jane Eyre. And I've been waiting for this moment for all my life.
Some of them are doing them, you assuming I'm a human. What I gotta do to get it through to you? I'm superhuman, innovative, and I'm made of rubber. So anything you say is saying over me. Devastating more than ever, demonstrating how to give them. Know to get some feeling like it's never fading, and I know that.
Oh, Jane Eyre. Hello, Theo. Let's welcome back.
Now, it is time to do Jane Eyre Chapter 3 analysis. It's been a long time. But really, what this chapter is all about is this. Jane Eyre receives better treatment. But now it is too late. Only a dramatic change can solve all of her problems. Here are some thought-provoking questions for you to consider. Number 1, how does Jane Eyre's treatment in Chapter 2 contrast her treatment in Chapter 3? And what causes these differences in her treatment to emerge? Number 2, how does Jane Eyre react when she receives certain privileges that she did not have before? How is this reaction justified? And number 3, this is a moral question, so type your response in the comments below. If you had to, would you live in poverty in exchange for receiving better treatment from your guardians? If so, why? If not, then why not? All right, a new character we're introduced to here is Mr. Lloyd. And Mr. Lloyd is a stranger to her, to Miss Jane Eyre. But she loves Mr. Lloyd. She considers him a good presence in the house. She finds his presence very welcoming and warm. And there's one reason why. Is because she doesn't like the Reeds. And there are many reasons why she doesn't like the Reeds, but let me give you a good recap of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. So basically, the reason why is because Mrs. Reed treats her like garbage. Because she is oblivious to everything that Mr. Reed, John Reed, her son, does. So basically, John Reed can treat her really badly, and Mrs. Reed is fine with it. Mrs. Reed's like, you know what? I don't care. It's my pretty son. My pretty son can't do anything to hurt this child. But when Jane Eyre tries to retaliate to John Reed's brutality, to his violence, what happens is that Miss Reed gets angry and she's like, oh look, this child is horrible. And so basically, none of her family shows empathy to her. She receives worse treatment from her family than John Reed, for example, does. And this is, of course, because John Reed is part of the family and Jane Eyre is not. After all, the only connection Jane Eyre has to the Reeds is this. Jane Eyre's father was the brother of Jane Eyre's mother. That's the main thing. And the thing is, the father is now dead. So everyone who is at least remotely related to Jane Eyre is dead. Ultimately, what does this mean? It means that she won't get any good treatment. But let's talk about Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd is the apothecary in the situation. So basically, he's like a physician, except for orphans. You see, orphans don't receive as good treatment as do for example, the children of the Reeds, like John Reed, Georgiana, Eliza, etc., etc. And the main thing is, he's called in here because her nerves were disturbed. And you're like, why are her nerves disturbed? Well, the main reason why is because she was locked up in this room simply because she retaliated to the abuse that John Reed did to her. So she was in this red room for so long of a time. And the thing is, in this room, John Reed died. So the only remote relation to her has died there. And so basically, his presence haunts that place like a ghost. And because she stays there for so long, it's like solitary fucking confinement. And so therefore, her nerves are completely disturbed. When she comes out, she just can no longer feel, I don't know how to say it, normal anymore. And the real thing is, what that means is that all the privileges that she previously liked are no longer. Kind of what I'm talking about in number 2. You see, she always wanted to be treated well. Jane Eyre always wanted to get certain things that she was not able to get because she was an orphan. And when Bessie Lee gives these things to her, Jane Eyre does not care. And the reason why is because materialistic possessions are no longer the things that she wants. What she wants is empathy. What she wants is for people to care for her. I'll give you some examples of the things. So, for example, Bessie Lee, she gives her a tart in a nice little plate, and that plate is a bird of paradise plate. So that bird is on that plate, and that plate kind of represents freedom, which Jane Eyre strives for. But yet, when she gets that, she's like, no, this is not enough. And the reason why she says that is because these are all images. She gets a book, and she used to see something very majestical. She used to see a fairy tale in Gulliver's Travels. But now she sees hopelessness. She sees him navigating a desolate world, kind of like how Jane Eyre is navigating a desolate world. Jane Eyre almost realizes there's no more hope in it for herself, because after that violence that she had to tolerate, there is too much trauma. There is too much on her to feel good about this world anymore. And ultimately, that means that all these privileges do not matter. They're simply possessions. They're simply things. They're simply images. Now, the only way to solve this, as I've said, is breaching empathy. We need to care for Jane Eyre, because they don't. They will never care. And, Jane Eyre specifically attacks Mrs. Reed on this in the future. And ultimately, we can still see that Mrs. Reed, although she might be trying to care, she's not trying enough. She's not treating her like a decent human being, and that's a problem. Well, so what happens is that she talks to Mr. Lloyd because of this health issue. It's not really a health issue. It's their problem. It's not the problem of an illness or whatnot, as they kind of like prophesize as it is. And so what she talks to him about is she's like, okay, she's like, what's wrong? What's the problem? I mean, this is a great house. And so what Mr. Reed does, not Mr. Reed, Mr. Lloyd, he has this line of questioning that provokes Jane Eyre to say, oh, I don't like this place. I don't like this setting. That's what he wants to get out of her. And so then he says, what do you want instead? He says, do you want to be with the Eyres? Do you want to be with your family, right? If you could be with your family, would you be with them? And then this comes into a very important debate, which is basically addressed in question 3. And so question 3 kind of is about, like, would you live in poverty in exchange for receiving better treatment? And so Jane Eyre herself said no. I want to know what your response is to the question, but let's just go to Jane Eyre's response. So Mr. Lloyd's like, okay, would you live with your family if you could, even if your family was poor? And she says no. And the reason why she says no is because this idea of poverty is associated with degradation in the society. Well, what does this mean? This is essentially meaning that people there during that time period believed that poverty was bad. And the reason why they believed poverty was bad was this idea of Victorian etiquette, of social class structure. You see, when you're born into this like rich family, or you're like raised up in a rich family, as Jane Eyre is, well, technically she's not, but she's now adopted into this rich family. All these ideas of how the poor are bad and the rich are good are really infiltrated. The poor are mean people. The rich are hospitable. And that's really not true, as we see. The rich are spoiled little brats, as seen in this book. But Jane Eyre's like, I cannot go with poverty. I cannot have this as my root, because ultimately poverty is sad. Poverty is the same thing that we associated with a low life, and she finds poverty below her. And therefore, she simply does not want to work every single day just though she has liberty, because it's not real liberty for her. If labor is liberty, well, then the question is it worth it? And for Jane Eyre, the answer is no, labor is not worth it. And the reason why labor is not worth it for her is because labor is associated with poor. Labor and this idea of being industrious, hardworking. This was not something that people cared for. In capitalism, the capitalistic systems ensure that labor is bad. They've always shown that it's better to be richer. Capitalism encourages you to make money. It doesn't encourage you to be hardworking, to be a part of the working class. The working class are spurned upon. The capitalism only awards the rich. And you see, what's very interesting here is that this idea of industrious and hardworking, that idea is associated maybe with communism, where people actually value that. But the thing is, it's not valued in this story simply because of the system of capitalism and the social class structure, as Charlotte Bronte explains. Well. So that ultimately means if you can't change your house, what can you change? Because our nerves are disturbed and we got to change something. And ultimately, we settle on one thing. We change the school. So Jane Eyre is able to go to a school. And the reason why she's supposed to go to a school is because schools can do good things to people. And sure, they may be strict on things, as we've seen with Bessie Lee. Bessie Lee told her, oh, they force you to do this. They force you to do that. Women are not treated that well in school. Women have to comply with strict regulations. And yeah, that restricts your freedom. And Jane Eyre, of course, wants to be free. Why else would she envy that bird of freedom on the plate? But at the same time, school allows you to be an artist, a painter. All the girls that Bessie Lee describes that went to school have done majestic things in her life. And Jane Eyre knows she wants a new life. So if her new life can't be now, it can be at least in the future. Through education, she can find a career that she loves and is passionate about. And ultimately, she will break the bondages of her family. And as always, Theolites, thanks for reading, and don't forget to subscribe.